All right, we've said that chemistry is the study of matter and the changes that matter undergoes, and all matter is made up of atoms. So the question becomes, what are atoms made of? And we're going to now look at some subatomic particles. So let's look at the three primary subatomic particles that you need to be familiar with. Those particles are the proton, the electron, and the neutron. And the characteristics of these subatomic particles you need to know are their locations in the atom, but also their mass and their charge. So the mass of a proton is set to 1 and its charge is +1. The mass of an electron is set to 0 because it's so small compared to a proton and a neutron. It has a mass, but for our purposes we'll say it's a 0. The charge on an electron is -1, so it has an opposite but equal charge to a proton. A neutron has the same mass as a proton. It has a mass of 1, but it's neutral and has no charge. So when we're talking about these charges on protons and electrons, whenever we have a positive charge and a negative charge of the same magnitude, they cancel each other out. So if we put together one proton and one electron, the proton's positive charge would cancel out the electron's negative charge, and you would have no overall charge. Where these reside within the atom, if we look at an atom and we have a nucleus inside the atom, and then this is way off scale, but you have a much bigger area outside of the atom, the proton and the neutron both sit in the nucleus of the atom. So they're in the central part of the atom. Then in this outer area, then you have the electrons are out here outside of the nucleus. So you have the proton and neutron with sitting in the nucleus, and then you have the electrons orbiting outside of the nucleus. So if atoms are made of these subatomic particles, if an atom is neutral, that means it has no charge, which means the number of protons equal the number of electrons. But let's look at what happens if we change the ratio of electrons to protons. So if an atom loses some electrons, if it loses electrons, then it has more protons than neutrons, and it has a positive charge. And that's what we call a cation. And you can think of this T here as a plus sign. So here we have the number of protons is greater than the number of electrons. So we have a positive charge. If we take this neutral atom and it actually gains electrons, then we have a different thing. We have what's called an anion. Right. And you can, and so in an anion, the number of electrons is greater than the number of protons. And so you have an overall negative charge. And the way to remember that is you can think of the second letter N as standing for negative. I also really do not like onions, and so that word looks pretty close to how you would spell onion, except for the A, and so I think of it negatively. The other way is some people will say cats have paws, so cations are positive. That's one way to look at it. But both cations and anions are examples of what are called an ion. So an ion is just an atom with a charge. So if we take an atom and it has a charge, it becomes an ion. Those ions can be of two different types, depending on if they have a positive charge or a negative charge. If they have a positive charge, they're called a cation. If they have a negative charge, they're called an anion. So that's what happens if we gain or lose electrons. The other thing that can happen is what happens if we gain or lose neutrons. So we say plus or minus neutrons. If we add some more neutrons to the nucleus, or we lose some neutrons from the nucleus, then what we end up with is an isotope. So an isotope is the same element, but just with a different mass, because the mass changes because we're adding more mass if we add neutrons, or we're decreasing the mass if we subtract neutrons. So all of these things are possible with a neutral atom. We can either add neutrons or subtract neutrons to make isotopes. We can add or lose electrons to make ions. The ions can be positively charged or negatively charged. The one thing that we cannot do with an atom is change the number of protons, then it becomes a different element. So remember that the number of protons that an atom has determines what element it is. So that's what differentiates one element from another, is the number of protons. So something that, for example, always has 6 protons, carbon always has 6 protons. So its atomic number is 6, which is characteristic of the given element.